Welcome to Spicer and Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsay Keith. Well, there's a battle brewing between the president and social media giants.
That's right. This is a big deal, and we're going to talk a lot about all of it. Twitter censorship and this whole vote by mail and voter fraud issue. I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump probably wouldn't be president without Twitter. He's used it as a platform to bypass the media and speak directly to his followers. But now the social giant is striking back and has begun starting to put warnings on his messages. But here's the thing. The logic behind the warnings are just plain factually wrong, especially as it relates to voter fraud, something well documented and acknowledged across the political spectrum. Right now, conservatives are specifically concerned about misconduct associated by vote-by-mail initiatives. And we're going to get into all of that. But first, I want to get into the whole point of why this is becoming a really big issue. President Trump is making it clear that he's not going to take big tech's bias and censorship against both himself and all of the folks on the right sitting down. He's about to take threatening action. This morning, the president tweeted this: Republicans feel that social media platforms totally silence conservative voices. We will strongly regulate or close them down before we can ever allow this to happen. We saw what they attempted to and failed to do in 2016. We cannot let a more sophisticated version of that happen again. Just like we can't let large-scale mail-in ballots take root in our country, it would be a free-for-all on cheating, forgery, and the theft of ballots. Whoever cheated the most would win. Likewise, social media, clean up your act now! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. The president tweets come right after Twitter put a warning label and fact check, so-called, a tweet by the president. Here's what Twitter's so-called fact checkers deemed as incorrect. There is no way that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, and even illegally printed out and fraudulently signed. The governor of California is sending ballots to millions of people. Twitter acknowledged that the president's tweet did not break, by the way, any of its rules. But according to their so-called fact checkers, mail-in ballots are rarely linked to voter fraud. Well, here's the thing. Twitter's overwhelmingly subjected so-called fact checkers don't actually, get this, holy smokes, don't have the facts. There's bipartisan agreement that mail-in ballots can lead to fraud. A commission that was co-chaired by former President Jimmy Carter, I think he's a Democrat, says so. And there's several examples of voter fraud, which we're going to talk about in the next hour with an expert on the show a little bit later. By the way, their so-called fact checkers, you know who they relied on? Not experts, the Washington Post and CNN, because apparently they're the authority. The New York Post cover today called the whole thing a tweet fight. And the president is surely not going to back down in this battle. So let's start this thing off with actually people who know what they're talking about. Joining us to talk about it all, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr and the author of the book Outrage, Inc., How the Liberal Mob Ruined Science, Journalism, and Hollywood, Derek Hunter, who's co-host of the Daily Callers podcast. Gentlemen, welcome.
Great to join you.
All right, Brendan. As I've said to you before, love the book because you break down this myth and dispel this notion that people who get to label themselves fact checkers are not fact checkers. They are opinion checkers. Tell me why, somebody who hears this should be suspect of someone who calls themselves a fact checker.
You get to choose the unit of measure. You're always going to be the smartest. You're always going to be the best looking. You're always going to be the brightest, the funniest, whatever it is. And that's what these fact checkers are. What Twitter did was find a story on CNN that disagreed with what the president said. That doesn't make it a fact. As you well know, what CNN posts isn't necessarily true and isn't necessarily the end-all, be-all when it comes to any issue whatsoever. On the issue of voter fraud, there are plenty of stories happening in real time in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, where a former Democratic Party operative pled guilty to stuffing ballot boxes, up to Michigan, where a mailman is now suspected of stealing mail-in ballots. You can find these things in real time. But if you only stop looking when you find what you're looking for, you're not really getting to the facts. You're getting to narrative confirmation. The New York Times has reported on the problems with mail-in voting, but that doesn't help Twitter. So they went to CNN, where they said, nope, nothing to see here. And they decided to go with that. Fact checking it's an art, really. It's not a science. The lie of the year back in 2013 was Barack Obama saying, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Something he'd been saying since 2008, when factcheck.org and all these other fact check websites had declared it varying degrees of true for the previous 4 years. So you can see that suddenly something becomes a lie. Well, once it becomes inconvenient to continue perpetuating the lie, they decide, well, we'll acknowledge that it was a lie. But that doesn't change the fact that they decided it was true for 4 years, and then suddenly the same thing was a lie. It's malleable. It is movable. Facts are not your truth. Facts are either true or not. There is voter fraud. That's what the president said. Mail is susceptible to it. That's what the president said. That's inconvenient to the left. So they declared it a lie.
Right. And I think that's the issue here that I have, which is it's not about facts. Facts are facts, right? 2 + 2 = 4. What they say is, yeah, it equals 4, but we think it should have been 5, therefore you're wrong. Commissioner Carr, social media is full of lies, opinions. That's kind of what they've always pretended to be, a platform, right? Joe Biden the other day said NAACP endorsed me. Not true. False. What are the legal repercussions that one could take? Because now they are getting in the ball game, if you will, of calling strikes and balls, of saying we don't agree with this and we don't. But they're not basing this off of what Brendan said, facts. I mean, excuse me, what Derek said are facts. How can we fight back, if you will, if they come out and say something like this, now get in this game of saying something's not true when in fact it is?
Yeah, Sean, look, this was not a fact check. This was opinion journalism. This is Twitter deciding to enter the fray and express their own political view and their disagreement with the president's statement. As we've walked through already, no other authority other than Jerry Nadler said that mail-in ballots are extremely susceptible to fraud. So not only did Twitter choose to engage in a political debate, it took the wrong factual side of that debate. Look, doing nothing isn't an option here. And at the same time, of course, we have to respect the First Amendment rights of platforms. But between those two positions, there is plenty of room for action. And Twitter's recent decisions and fact-checking that tweet has only added accelerant to the movement for someone to do something about this. And here's what I think. One, I think we need to turn off the bias filters. If you don't want to go online and have Twitter, quote unquote, fact-checking your feed, you should be able to opt out of that. At the same time, if Twitter is out there in Congress representing that they don't engage in any conservative bias, then when they do engage in acts like that, there should be accountability for the neutrality that they've consistently represented to Congress on these issues. And if they want to come forward and say, look, we are in the tank for Republicans or we're in the tank for Democrats, fine. They should do that, and then we can all act accordingly based on that truth.
But Section 230 that you guys monitor, they've claimed that they're just platforms, that they're not in the publishing game, but clearly they are now. And so they want to play it both ways. They want to say, we're a platform, we don't take sides, you can't sue us because we're only allowing people to post. But now they are in the game actively, and should they be treated more like publishers?
This is certainly heightening the calls for reforms of 230. Remember, 230 only protects good faith takedowns by online platforms. If they're doing this in a way that is in bad faith, then they aren't protected by 230. I approach this more as like a business practice. If you hold yourself out as a neutral platform and then fail to live up to that public promise, that's like a Federal Trade Commission style unfair or deceptive trade practice. I think it would make sense for the Federal Trade Commission to step in and say, look, if you're going to maintain that you're neutral, that's your decision, and then you need to be held accountable to that decision.
Interesting. That's great. Brendan, Derek, the thing that I think is so fascinating is that they relied on CNN as Washington Post as their basis for calling this fact. Yet between Jerry Nadler's comments back in 2004 and in 2005, a federal commission chaired by a Democratic president, President Carter, said that we did need to be concerned about voter fraud in this type of voting. Shouldn't that have been the basis?
You would think, but that would be them being an honest broker, which they aren't. They present themselves as a kiosk where anybody can put up a flyer for their band looking for a new bass player, when in reality, they're a publisher. They're acting more and more like a publisher. And as the commissioner said, this should be something that they should be treated like a publisher. Publishers have responsibilities and publishers have liabilities. If you get, destroyed, if you get attacked wrongly on social media and it's just a kiosk, well, then you take it up with the person who did it. But if the kiosk becomes a publisher and decides what is acceptable on their platform, they suddenly become the filter of the publisher and they have some liability. I would like to see a test case. I would like to see, Senator Marco Rubio was talking today about how they've moved into the publishing world and have to face the consequences accordingly. I would like to see hearings. I would like to see perhaps some legislation, maybe some regulatory action on behalf of the president. He's hinted about that today on Twitter, and see if that cleans up their act. I'm not in favor of regulation, but I'm also not in favor of companies lying to the public and to their audience. We are the product on Twitter. Yeah. We have certain expectations from them, and if they are going to change the bar, then our relationship with them has to change accordingly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you guys both more. There's so much to break down in this whole area of what big tech is doing. And I'm proud to actually say that next week, we're going to focus on a piece of this every single day. Commissioner Carr, we look forward to having you back to break this down. We're going to talk about this entire element of social media bias against the right. It's going to be a powerful week-long series featuring conservatives who've been blocked or banned by big tech. We're going to hear their stories. We're going to ask why they were censored. We're all going to also talk to legal and government experts about your rights to free speech and whether they're being violated by these tech companies. And we're also going to discuss whether or not social media platforms can claim, just like what we just talked about, whether they're private companies and they're just doing this platform-based stuff, or if they have the right to ban and censor anyone they want. This is going to be powerful. Set your DVRs. It's going to be one heck of a week. But coming up next, can you imagine mail-in ballots all around the country? The president's suggesting that these will lead to fraud. We're going to speak to a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, one of the nation's preeminent experts, later. And California's governor comes under fire by the RNC. We're going to explain why his recent decision may be unconstitutional.